Welcome to What is NES? What is NES is a very educative program asking questions about contemporary challenges confronting us as a nation and seeking relevant answers from people with what we call accumulated wisdom to help all of us to appreciate some of the approaches that we can adopt for the challenges confronting us in contemporary times. Now, media has become one of the powerful social institutions in terms of public education, in terms of national orientation. And thank God we have a man who is a face of media in this country. He has been around from academic institutions, from the print media, and from television. Wherever you pick it from academia, from in terms of print and all branches, that is the man we need to hear from, especially as we discuss contemporary media culture in this country. Stay with us. What is next on GTV, the authentic and trusted voice of Ghana? I'm talking about Professor Kwame Karikari. Prof, welcome to What is Next?
Thank you very much.
We have known Professor Karikari from University of Ghana. We have known Professor Karikari from GBC as former Director General. We have known Professor Karikari from Media Foundation West Africa. But today, help my viewers to know a little bit about you. Who is Professor Kwame Karikari?
Well, Kwame Karikari is a simple Ghanaian citizen born in Achim, Ewisa, in the eastern region. I went to school in the boarding school, Ewisa Presbyterian boarding school, one of the famous boys' boarding schools that the Presbyterian Church endowed this country with, and which has produced many patriotic Ghanaians in various services to this nation. I have been a teacher virtually all my life, because I went to a training college, because I passed all kinds of colleges through common entrance, but my father couldn't afford to pay school fees, even in those days of the late 50s and 60s. So, but my father was a good guide, a good counselor. He said, Kwame, look, whatever you want to be, if you go through training college and you study hard, you can attain whatever you have attained. And he mentioned all kinds of important personalities who have become notable figures in our country through teaching. So I went to Commander Teacher Training College. Later on, went to Advanced Teacher Training College. I have taught at the primary school level in Ashanti region, the secondary school level at Navrongo Secondary School, something that makes me feel so proud, because that school too has produced many prominent Ghanaians in all walks of life, in medicine, engineering, whatever. I got interested in media through reading the newspapers. I'm somebody who started loving reading very early. My father used to send me to buy the newspaper, and I would spend a little bit of time on the road reading. So he would always chastise me, Kwame, why are you late? And I would scratch my head. He said, you were reading. If you were reading, that's okay. But if you were doing something else, then I'm warning you, don't do that again. So one of the important journalists in this country who really inspired me was Cameron Diodu. Where I loved his writing. Whenever he wrote, he edited the drum in those days. He also edited the graphic along the line, and a few others. And from young, I felt that the newspapers or the media generally were an important cultural institution, political institution that should help society enlighten itself and also find ways of solving some of its problems. So through reading and association also with all kinds of people from home and so on, I got involved in loving journalism, and that's what has brought me here.
Yes, and you are former Director General of Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. The media landscape in Ghana at the time that you serve as Director General of GBC must be different from today's Ghanaian media. What has changed?
It's like day and night. What has changed is itself revolutionary in our society, in much of Africa, and in much of the world. I was appointed Director General of GBC in 1982, to be exact, in April 1982, at the maddening height of the revolution and the rule of the PNDC. I have cherished that experience very much, even though there ought to be very many scathing comments or unfavorable attitudes to the rule of the PNDC because of the massive violations of human rights and so many things. But I cherish my service at the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation because, first of all, I learned so much as a person. I learned so much about managing institutions. I learned so much about working with other human beings in a big institution. I learned so much about working with people in power, not just people in military power, but people in all manner of political power. I learned a lot. And so, in that sense, I always will feel proud and grateful to Rawlings for appointing me because of the enormous experience I gained. But also, I think even in those difficult days, it set me thinking about media in society. That was the only broadcasting company in this country. And even though, as the only broadcasting station, even though it was used and in many ways I would suppose abused by government, and it wasn't only the PNDC government that used the GBC as such. That's how it was used by the colonial people who set it up, by the first government and subsequent governments. And that's how it's been in all societies where the state-owned, the broadcasting facility is state-owned. It becomes a government mouthpiece, and so under so many political circumstances, it can be abused. It can be used for people who are obsessed with monopolizing power, people who are obsessed with intolerance of the views of citizens and other groups and institutions in society. And that lesson or that knowledge and experience made me think, and in the end, I think it also contributed to my devoting myself to promoting press freedom and freedom of expression generally. Because looking back, whilst I was here, I tried myself not to do anything to harm any journalist or any worker here, or to do anything that might put any staff here in trouble. In fact, I tried to do my best to shield.
That was during the revolution.
This was during the revolution.
But I'll come back to press freedom and what journalists are going through today and all that. But is there one thing about Ghanaian media today that you are so excited about?
I'm excited in the positive sense of the promise or the possibility of the media really putting people in authority to task. That is the potential and the possibility of questioning authority. I don't think we are doing well as well. We could do much better. There is a sense of complacency. But I'm saying that I'm excited about the freedom the media have and the promise or the possibility that they could do better in questioning authority, in questioning government, in not allowing government to just go scot-free, telling us anything that they want. But I'm also excited in the negative way about a certain level of mediocrity, a certain level of illiteracy, actually, in much of our media today, because it appears to me that with all the freedom we have, the intellectual level or the work of the media to enlighten us is very, very weak. What you often encounter with the media, whether it's print, TV, or radio, is really nothing that uplifts us, nothing that really the ordinary listener will say, okay, this is what it is. This is how it is. Our media landscape is too mundane. It's too ordinary.
Prof, now let's go to the training platform. In terms of training, now some of the, let me say, young people we have in the media platform, some of them have not received any formal training in journalism. So what are the facilities, even those who have been trained, for continuous training for us to get some of the things you are touching on? I know you are also another executive director of
the Media Foundation.
Yeah, Media Foundation. You've been, you and others. But now, what are they and how effective are they?
Well, you see, the content of media, of course, depends on the level of training or education the people in the media have. But it does not depend only on the training of the journalists in journalism, because the training in journalism equips you with the skills, the technical expertise, and also the do's and don'ts of the profession, that is the ethics of the profession. Basically, journalism is an intellectual activity. It is part of the intellectual sector of society, because journalism works with ideas, with knowledge, and so on and so forth. So the people in the media, the journalists, must acquire a lot of knowledge on their own outside of school by reading. But I am sorry to say that the overwhelming majority of our media people don't read anything. Therefore, they are unable to acquire the intellectual capacity to discern, to analyze, and therefore to raise the necessary questions to authority. So you will find out that when a government is in power, you tend to see two things in the media. Those that are simply replaying what government is saying, and those that appear to be critical are not critical, they are only oppositional. And just being oppositional doesn't require any intellectual finesse. So those who are oppositional, you see that either because they lack the intellectual refinement and analytical capacity, therefore they easily resort to banality, to insults, abuses of the persons in office or the persons they dislike or oppose.
Just last on this platform, what is next? Dr. Tony Otinjesi raised an issue that there's a phenomenon. You tune to almost all the FM stations and television stations in the morning show, breakfast show, and they are all reviewing newspapers. And in the review, you get representatives from the major political parties. And now they put the issue on table. Then the politicians take over. Now you are talking about intellectual, stimulation. You are talking about excitement. Now this is the trend. And what can the media do? Can we do anything differently? And almost all the media houses, and they have been employed. These are what their employers want.
Well,
whether Ghanaians want that is a different.
That's a different thing. But you see, again, it brings us to the question of the intellectual contribution of our political parties to the development of this society. I mean, the political pundits from the political parties who go on these programs, if you listen carefully to most of them, they are not enlightening even the followers of their own parties about the policy issues they appear to be handling. It's banal. If it is party A or party B, I mean, you don't really get a difference in terms of the quality of discussion they are having. Now, but it's not surprising because, you see, the political parties we have now and the people who go into politics are not, it seems to me, are not in politics for social change. They are in politics more for the power, political power, and the things that accrue from it. So they've abandoned any commitment to enlightening members of their parties, even to the so-called ideological principles that they espouse or that they say they are based on. And so they can't therefore go on radio stations and make us think better than we do. A number of times, if you happen to be somebody who is a bit more sophisticated, listening to many of or most of those morning show programs is a waste of time, because they don't enlighten you about any policy. They don't educate you about whether it's the budget or this or that. All you hear are those for the existing government defending what the government is doing, and those on the other side just attacking and condemning. So if you are an average citizen who wants to know, there's not much to learn from there.
Yeah, Prof, and you are a professor in journalism. You've been to University of Ghana, the School of Communication. What do we do? In terms of even the curriculum we are running, the various journalism schools and communication institutions, what do we do? Because you are worried. And if somebody like you is worried, you are a former board chairman of graphic group of companies.
I'm still there.
So, yes. So, number one person that when it comes to media journalism issues must be, and you are a real advocate on such matters. What should we do? Because as you are worried, there are many people who are not excited about the politicization of breakfast show and in Ghana and paper review, and they feel we are not getting much.
What do we do? It's a very good but a big question. A lot depends on the owners of the media houses. I happen to know some owners. And see, again, ownership of assets like the media depends on how much money a person has, and then also what the people invest in it for. Take some of the radio stations that are set up by some leaders in political parties. I am always curious to understand why people who have run the affairs of this country before or are still running the affairs of this country have made money partly or largely from being in government, why such people who one would assume are leaders, are statesmen, why they will invest in a radio station and employ people whose main job description is to insult their opponents. I find it very curious. What kind of mindset? Why would anybody who considers himself as having been a minister or is still a minister or somebody who has sat down and thought and planned about how to run this country, making money on, and all the person does is look in the society for people who have the dirtiest of tongues. Mm-hmm. And I find it extremely, I can only conclude that therefore such people are not in politics for the good of the country. Otherwise, you would set up a radio station to enlighten us and not employ people whose job from morning to night is simply attacking this politician or my opponent. That's very, very curious for me to understand. Now, that's not what all the owners of the media are, but many of the owners of the media, and here let's be careful. I am not saying that each and every media house in this country is like that. No, we have some excellent media houses. We have some really wonderful world-class radio, television stations, private, as well as our own GBC. GBC is a different kettle of fish, has its own problems, but it is still professional. But in the private sector, we have a few which can compare with the best of anywhere. So don't let me sound like nothing is good. No. But I'm saying that I've traveled, done training in radio stations around the country. There are small stations in different parts of the country. Ada, Tumuwa, and so on and so forth. What we call community radio stations, who are doing fantastic job on the ground. But apart from this few, the rest is nothing to write home about. And because the owners have no inkling about broadcasting, sometimes they set it up to support their parties, or sometimes they set it up and just leave it like that. They don't even train the staff. They don't even have what you call an editorial policy for the station as to how to plan and manage your programs. So you see that there are some radio stations where they don't even have a program plan for the day. They just go on air and they go on air.
Review papers. But Prof, some of you, will somebody want to pick this issue and maybe bring all morning show, breakfast show, host together for a conversation? Because now this morning paper review, which in fact gradually is becoming MPP, NDC kind of thing. You raise issue of corruption, and now anybody can set up a print, newspaper. Yeah. They will review it. Whatever you put it, they will review it. You only need to say this man is corrupt. Then you start a conversation. But you were also corrupt when you were in government. Who is more corrupt? You are more corrupt. And some of them even fight on platforms. Yes. What do we do? Do we need to create platform for engagement?
You see, I think there is training is one thing that may make a difference, but I can also assure you that there are many managers of radio stations and owners of, in fact, if you want to organize a meeting today of the owners of media houses, not one will come. They will only come if it has to do with things like allocation of frequency problems, or some policy things that directly affect their incomes. But if you want to bring them around on these issues about the real business of broadcasting, programs, content, and so on, most managers won't mind you at all. But again, how do we change these things? I think, there are a few that, as I have said, are really high standard. Now, I always believe that after a while, many of the stations will fall by the wayside. And indeed, many are falling by the wayside. Many are unable to make it financially. But by and by, I think many will fall by the wayside. For instance, now we know from all kinds of studies that people are tired of political insults on radio. So any political party and a radio station that is continually engaging in that kind of broadcasting is losing out. People are not listening anymore. They are tired of it. Because as I said, after a while, people want to know something more edifying than me impugning on Reverend Opuni's reputation. But I think the example of certain owners and managers of radio stations is worthwhile. Some of them actually invest on their own in training their staff, and that's why they keep making so much progress. Again, when the opening up of the airwaves was coming, some of us advocated for so many things, but both the private sector media owners and then governments, both MPP and NDC, in the past, did not even respect the demands we were making. That is why up to now, for instance, there's no broadcasting law in this country. And if there was a legislation on broadcasting, the bill that is there has many provisions that might...
Where have we reached with the bill?
Well, I don't know where it is, but it's been, I think, I know that the last time I knew about it was about 4 or 5 years ago, when it was in Parliament but had not been tabled. And I know that at the Ministry of Information, a small committee worked on it, but it didn't go back to Parliament for Parliament to deliberate on it. And now, the way the situation is, I think that may need to be reviewed because of changes in technology and other realities in our society.
Viewers, this is What is Next on GTV, and I'm in conversation with Professor Kwame Karikari, a former Director General of GBC. He is the board chairman of the Graphic Group of Companies, a former executive director of Media Foundation for West Africa. Prof, in the 1980s, media unity was not so much accomplished due to the numbers. Today, the proliferation of media houses with the politicization that you touch on gradually is making media unity, sanity, discipline, complaint complex. And you have just touched on the bill. Till we get the bill, especially as we move to 2020, the hate speech in public discourse. You've earlier on raised the issue that when you call the owners of the media houses, they will not come. But something must be done, because we can't continue like this. And now that is the unity you talk about. It's difficult to get the media unity, and the control is getting out of hand. But goes to election, what do we do that we sanitize the atmosphere?
First of all, I think that we should not hope for or advocate for uniformity in the media landscape. That's not what you are talking about. But when you talk about media unity, somebody is likely to get you wrong.
Okay.
That you are talking about uniformity. No. because we are
I'm raising that issue because some media houses are known as Party A, Party B.
Yes.
So getting them even to can we, now it's becoming complex. Not necessary uniformity, like you said. Yeah.
Yes. Again, at the Media Foundation for West Africa, from I think 2012, yes, from 2012, 2016, we monitored during election years the way broadcasting houses were behaving, what we called indecent language.
Yeah.
Now, from 2012 to 2016, there was a significant improvement because we were naming and shaming many of the people now and many of the stations. Indeed, many of the hosts of programs would stop people when they started using language that was considered unedifying on air. So things in that sense are improving. And indeed, generally, the use of indecent language, intemperate language, unacceptable language in public is going down. Now, when it comes to hate speech specifically, what our monitoring has also found out is that with all of these problems of the media we are talking about, there are two areas where our media have happily and luckily been very, very good. And that is that our media do not use ethnicity, tribalism, as something to divide us about. People do not insult people based on their tribal affiliation or their tribal origins and so on, which is very, very, very important. You find out that in this country, and even the politicians, when they are campaigning and so on and so forth, do not campaign or do not use language that divide us along ethnic lines, which is very, very important for our development. So in that sense, hate speech which leads to enmity, division, and also conflict in terms of ethnic relations in this country, both at the media level and at the political party level, do not exist in any way that even warrants any serious discussion, which is something that we must pride ourselves with. What we have is the polarization between the two big parties. And I think that's for effect. It's also, again, because those parties must win power at all costs, by all means. So they do all manner of things that divide us along those lines. And therefore, I think that the more we, organizations like the Media Foundation for West Africa, the National Media Commission, the Peace Council, the more we monitor the language of the media around election and condemn outright those who are breaching the rules, we will get somewhere. If we don't speak out, as it is with all issues in a democracy, then we allow those who are abusing their citizenship, their rights, who are abusing their rights against others, they will continue to do what they please. So I think the only antidote is for people in the public to speak up against the misuse of the airwaves for dividing us along political lines.
Are you worried about the recent rating of media freedom in Ghana?
Yes, I think that it is one thing we have earned the hard way, and therefore we should protect, promote, and deepen. And so anything that subtracts from the gains we have made, I think ought to concern all of us. It is not, as I started by saying, the media have a potential to protect our rights, first of all, protect the Constitution, protect our rights, and help us unite and be one as a people, and to go about our normal day-to-day lives in peace and in harmony. So if anything threatens the rights of the media to do that work, we should be concerned. And I think where these threats are coming from are things that we should all be concerned with. For instance, it is not very good that we do not know up to now who killed this young man who worked for Anas, Swale.
16th January.
Yes. It's not good that we still, the security agencies have still not been able to identify the perpetrators. There were threats on the life of Manasseh Azure, a fine journalist, a fine investigative journalist, and we still don't know who was threatening his life. All these things do not help the strengthening of press freedom. Again, we have situations where we do know that some people in media themselves take money to do the bidding of certain forces in the society who are not necessarily in the interest of press freedom and so on. And some of these things are not very, very savory, for press freedom. But I think we should, you see, again, there is, at a certain level, there is regularly attacks on journalists by the police, for instance. Those acts by the police against the safety of journalists, seizing their cameras, beating them up, stopping them from doing their work in certain places and so on, ought to stop. Occasionally, an IGP has apologized on behalf of the police culprits, but nobody has been brought to book. Luckily, the Media Foundation for West Africa and other media organizations like the Ghana Journalists Association, the Private Newspaper Publishers, Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, have worked out with the Ghana Police Service an arrangement. We've worked out, a framework for how the police should deal with the media and how the media should also deal with the police, so that there's some kind of...
Prof, these things happen at the watch of the police. In fact, when the political parties, they create the problem, and the media people are covering, then they turn their guns on them.
Yes.
So moving into the general election, what should we do differently? How do we correct the wrong? And sometimes the police will be there. The recent Ayawaso, you find people in security uniform. So beyond promises and apologies that we have received from the IGPs, beyond that, what should be different?
I think one institution that should be much more radical than it is now is the Peace Council. You see, the Peace Council, I think, has been too lame and too almost apologetic, in the sense that I think they are usually too much on the moral side of things, but not on the advocacy side of things. A peace council doesn't just sit there and hope for peace. A peace council must advocate for peace. In other words, in response to the question you pose, knowing that the political parties behave this way or that way, the Peace Council should call meetings of political parties and make certain demands that during this political season, you are not supposed to do this, you are not supposed to do that. And bring out the resolutions also in public. In other words, the Peace Council should advocate for people to behave in ways that bring about peace and not sit and just make appeals.
What about Ghana Journalists Association?
Because the Journalists Association is a voluntary association. It fights its fights, but it doesn't have any power to stop anybody from doing anything. It's been fighting for press freedom all the time. It's been protesting against the police and other sources of attacks on journalists, but because it's not a statutory body, because it doesn't have any legal powers, it can't do much. But an organization like the Peace Council, if the Peace Council calls leaders of political parties, they will come. But the Ghana Journalists Association cannot summon anybody, not even an ordinary propagandist of a political party. They can't. They have no weight and no authority to summon anybody to any conference. But the Peace Council can, in association perhaps with other agencies. The NCC is there. And even to an extent, though it's outside of its mandate, the Electoral Commission is itself also interested in elections being conducted in a peaceful manner. So the Peace Council could assemble all of these forces and see that certain measures are put in place.
This is what is next on GTV, the station of the nation. I'm in conversation with Professor Kwame Karikari. Prof, social media, that is the Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, etc., have become part of our contemporary media culture. Are you satisfied about how the usage, the monitoring, and control have been done so far?
In our country, I'll say that there are problems with it, but I don't see those problems as such a threat or such bad that we may even say that, look, let's scrap them. No. Let's remember that all of these technologies are technologies for freedom of expression, for people expressing themselves. But they have peculiar characteristics that make them become problematic. The anonymity of it, the WhatsApp and all of them, the anonymity of it, the facelessness of people who use it. You can remain faceless on any of these platforms. So they give it, the facelessness and the anonymity have a positive side of it, in the sense that people who may even be expressing the truth or something useful for society but are shy, are not too sure of themselves, or do not want to be known, can put out something that is useful for society. But we are concerned about the abuses. And those abuses are there. And again, even the more advanced, technologically advanced societies have a hard time regulating these technologies. We do know that the governments in these more advanced economies and technologically advanced societies are working with the owners, the companies, to find ways of regulating them and bring some level of sanity in them. In the meantime, I think that some measures ought to be taken in some areas. For instance, there is, I think, a regulation that everybody must register their cell phone. But I don't think that the telecom companies are being serious with it. Recently, I think the Minister of Communications or so, came out saying that people should go and register. I think we shouldn't end there. If, for instance, you receive something you don't like, that even borders on criminality, from my number, we should ask those companies to identify the person. But right now, nobody takes them to task. I think the company should be made to register everybody. And if they don't, and a number is used for certain things that are criminal, those companies should be held responsible. But now they are not held responsible, which is not right. If we did, because you and I, because we are somehow in the public space, we sometimes receive messages that are insulting or that are not something you want on your phone, as a text message or WhatsApp and so on. But meanwhile, you can't find out who they are because the telecoms will tell you we don't know.
Prof, in some countries, in fact, some African countries and elsewhere, during the election, they just shut down social media.
Yeah.
Do you envisage we will get there?
We shouldn't do that. There should be no reason why we should do that. The only, in an election year, there are a number of things that social media or regular media may do that might threaten the peace of the elections. And that is if they are used in mobilizing people to commit violence or to commit certain crimes or certain activities that may disrupt the peace or disrupt the electoral process. Now, but you will find out that in every society where such massive mobilization can take place, there is an organization behind it. It's not just individuals. You and I cannot go out there and use our WhatsApp or Twitter or something to mobilize Ghanaians to act this way or that way during election time or during any time. Whenever any media, social or traditional, are used to mobilize people to act in ways that impact society, there is an organized force behind it. So in election time, the only groups of persons or people who might use the media or the social media to cause any difficulty could be political parties. Nobody else would do that because only political parties would have an interest in acting this way or that way in an election year. And so I don't think there should be any cause that should warrant the banning of social media during election time. Again, if the owners of the gadgets are registered and anything happens that is not acceptable, the security should be able to trace such a person through the telecoms companies. After all, it is these gadgets we are using for Twitter, Facebook, or whatever. And they are all things that can be monitored by the telecom companies through knowing who, under whose name a cell phone is registered and so on. So, otherwise, what else would warrant the banning of any social media in an election year? I don't see any reason.
Have we paid much academic attention to this social media, especially in media and journalism?
There have been studies. There are studies.
I mean, in this country?
In this country, not much. Not much, as far as I know, has been done. There are scholars in communication who are doing some studies on social media, but not in this area of social media, political mobilization, social media, and the fomenting of violence or such issues. I don't know any study in Ghana.
This is What is Next on GTV. And I'm in conversation with Prof Kwame Karikari. Prof, in media, is there anything we can identify and call national orientation?
The media, as a public institution, ordinarily engage in activities that should help society have a certain orientation about itself as a particular society. So the media help us to build our identity as a people belonging to a particular geographical space we may call a country or a nation or what. Let's take GBC, for instance. The idea that we identify ourselves as Ghanaians, the idea of Ghana was mooted by politicians, J.B. Dankwa, Kwame Nkrumah, and others, that this place the Europeans called the Gold Coast, when we are free, we will not call it Gold Coast anymore. We call it Ghana. So on March 5th, at the Polo Ground, Kwame Nkrumah pronounced that we are now called Ghana.
That's 1957.
That's 1957. Now, beyond that, it took GBC, Radio Ghana, there wasn't even television, which drummed in our ears. Every day we are called Ghana, we are called Ghana, we are called Ghana. And so now, within a few months of 1957, by the end of that year, there was nobody who called himself a Gold Coaster. There are so many other things that have oriented us as Ghanaians. In the cultural world, take music, high life. High life, I mean, in those days, how many people had gramophones? How many people, had their own technologies of playing music? But it was this Radio Ghana, which was playing music called high life, that every Ghanaian became associated with. It was this same GBC that did so many things to orient us as one people with a government that runs our affairs, with as a people who are doing this or are doing that, in agriculture, in whatever. So the media, by the day-to-day activities they engage in, contribute to shaping our consciousness as a people in a particular environment. For instance, nowadays, and since about 1990, I think that the media have made enormous contribution in Ghanaians accepting and thinking and possibly respecting what we call democracy. It's the media that wakes us up to go and vote, because the media in their diverse ways have promoted the idea that multi-party politics is the way for us to organize and manage our public affairs. So in the diversity or in the multiplicity of differences, there's always some core values that the media would project, that the media will promote. And I think these are some of the things that make us
President Kufuor set up a whole Ministry of Information and National Orientation with Mrs. Oboshi.
Yes.
Now we don't have that.
Yes.
But with what you have, the issues you just raised, we still need national orientation. Now, how do we position or reposition Ghanaian media to now bring an issue of national orientation as a major issue for us? Because we need it. The issues you just raised, our national identity, attitudinal change, our civic responsibility. Yeah. But how do we place that as a core, a cutting-edge issue for Ghanaian media, even though we don't have a whole ministry like President Kufuor did years ago?
Again, the media as an institution does not necessarily by themselves create and promote these things. Those core things that make up what we might call national orientation come from elsewhere. The values that we have, our religious institutions, religious leaders, who are, by their training, by their call, provide us the moral guidance, the spiritual guidance in society, will ordinarily, also in their day-to-day functions, provide us those values.
Prof, going into 2020, are you optimistic that the media will do a better job?
I am optimistic that the media will continue to help us have a peaceful and stable election. That I am convinced about, that our media have by and large not misbehaved in the direction of helping to bring about confusion. So I'm optimistic that our media, with all the difficulties and all of the shortcomings, will continue to play the role of helping us have a peaceful and successful election.
Viewers, how I wish we will have time to continue on and on with Professor Kwame Karikari, but this is how best we can get. Time will allow us, but he's raised very important issues for us that we must all consider as a nation. We must come on board matters of national orientation, and various media houses must find a way to assist. And he is calling also National Peace Council and faith-based organization that this media issue, we must all show interest and even go beyond concern and be more pragmatic what we can do together, especially as we move into the 2020 general election. This is what is next. We are here for the common good. Kwabena Opuni-Frimpong, your regular host. Prof, we are so grateful to have you on What is
Thank
Next.
you very much. It's a pleasure.
Great.
An honor.